speaker goes to it. Kinda. Nope, not that one. Nope, not that one.
Not bring you back to junior high?
like. Yeah, it sounds like Meatloaf. Can you put it back to normal?
What?
Is that slice?
No, my friend, they're trying to adopt, and so she's been selling sourdough.
Oh,
So it's mozzarella, pepperoni, and cheddar So if I'm gonna buy something, might as well be from them.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff.
Alright. Isn't that Blake's sweatshirt?
Yeah.
Are you stealing it?
Nope, I'm borrowing it. Yeah, how dare you? You're just gonna break it.
Did you find the volleyball?
No, we borrowed one.
Oh, okay.
I brought it to church here. But I'm glad
You found something. I figured there was, at least from what I remember, there was a few volleyballs.
Yeah. Jude's taking over your garage though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, teenagers, they just, you give them an inch and they take a yard.
Yeah. Hopefully it doesn't live there for a couple of years.
Well, I guess he wants to turn it into a manual.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he took the whole thing out with his buddy. And then I got mad at him because it's leaking transmission
Yeah, I saw
fluid, and it's like, gotta put stuff down, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he needs a part, and then he'll like leave the garage, and the garage door open, and everything's just laid out as hung for half a day.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, clean up after yourself.
Well, that's good. Some good skills he's gaining.
Oh yeah, you know, maybe you can work on the truck.
Yeah. And then sell it, right? Are you guys gonna sell it or keep it?
No, we'll probably keep it. I mean, it's in working order for the most part, but there's definitely some issues with the crankshaft. Because if you try to go from, so you can switch from a
Why are you looking about a little bit?
2
seat?
No,
It's 2x4.
what I'm saying is,
So,
no.
to a 4x4.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But then you have the high and low gears.
Right.
But it doesn't want to go from high to low.
Mm.
There's something in the gearbox that seizes or just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't know. That sounds a bit more complicated than what I want to take
Yeah.
on at the moment. But it works.
Just use it as like a hauler.
In theory, yes, but it's more just fun.
Yeah.
You know, it's the first manual transmission that I've owned.
That might be Ellis's truck.
Yeah, maybe. They say it's a good thing to train them young
Yeah. Start with manual.
and they're not on their phones.
I don't know. My experience with manual transmission and beginning drivers is that it almost always like will end in at least one roasted transmission. Like by the end, you know, like it's kind of a hard process to teach somebody sometimes, depending on the car.
Yeah.
Sure.
But I know I ruined my first transmission learning how to drive.
Did you?
Over long term, yeah.
Yeah.
Between that and the first car wreck, which almost always, you know, like happens within the first couple of years.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know, maybe I'm incorrect. Did you guys have an accident like within the first couple of years of owning a car?
No. But
Not. So I didn't hit anybody, but certainly I had episodes where, like I was in Wisconsin,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember there was, a bad snowstorm.
Yeah, yeah,
There was a lot of
Okay,
snow
you
on the
just
road,
located.
and I remember there was like a cardboard box that was like partially buried in the middle of the road.
Sure.
And so as I was coming through, and I was probably going a little faster than what I should have, but you see this box and you're like, yeah, probably shouldn't hit that box. you
Yeah.
know? And so you turn, but of course there's like ice and snow, and so like I hit the brake, but then you keep sliding,
Mhm.
and I slid right up into a tree and
Mhm.
kind of hit the front bumper. And I mean, it didn't really look that bad, but it was kind of an older car, and my dad had it assessed, and it's like, to repair something like that almost equaled the worth of the car. And it was like, just for sliding into a,
Yeah, same thing for me. It wasn't like a car accident per se, like a huge accident, but I ran my first car into. So I was looking for somebody's driveway out in the country, and I was like going down roads, like trying to find this house, and then we came upon it, and it was like directly across the road from us, and there was a driveway entrance, and I was like, oh, okay, great. So I crossed the road, and I went to go up the driveway, and I didn't realize that there was a lip on the concrete edge that was maybe, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 inches, but it was just enough that the engine mount hung down on my car, and it rammed right into it, and the whole thing just stopped.
Yeah.
Like, and it like
oh
tweaked
no.
everything inward. It wasn't more than 5 or 10 miles an hour, but it was enough to throw the passenger into the windshield and
Oh wow.
and wreck my first car. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
basically, but anyway, I guess my point is we
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of rough on my first cars. Like,
Yeah, you're gonna make mistakes. Hopefully it's not a mistake that's a big one.
yeah,
probably depends on where, where you grew up driving to. I
Sure.
lived up in the mountains, so it was always, single lane or, 2-lane roads, not a lot of traffic.
Mm.
And we always, our training was pretty extensive compared to other states.
Mhm.
So they actually took us out on a frozen lake, and you had to learn how to gain control of your vehicle once it started sliding.
Wow.
We were in the wrong parking lot doing that.
Oh, yeah.
I want you to head straight at that light post, and I'll tell you when to turn.
Yeah.
I got some of the most valuable advice in driving, like watching this stupid show that was like Canada's Worst Drivers. They
No,
took
like,
these
stop.
people who were like god awful drivers and they put them in like a reality TV situation where they caught them. And they bring in like professional drivers and then go through scenarios and stuff. And teach these people kind of like how to behave like people. But one of the lessons they had was on both anti-lock brakes and the function of locking brakes, which I have,
Yeah.
or I used to have on my truck, but didn't realize it, and how that contributes to sliding, and like, so like they went through this exercise where they're like, okay, if you lock your brakes in a car that's older than like 1980 or whatever, the brakes actually lock.
That was for 1 minute.
And then once that happens, you can't steer. You just go straight into whatever's in front of you. And so they're like, no, the thing you got to do, and this seems really counterintuitive, is you have to give it gas. You have to let out the brakes. You have to let the wheel spin, and you have to like turn. Like you have to look in the direction in which you're going to turn and turn, because otherwise you'll just slide right into your target.
Yeah.
And so one day I was going down the freeway, and I've had that happen to me in the snow before, but not quite like realize what was happening. Like, but I was on the freeway and somebody stopped on the freeway, like right in front of me, and I was doing like 70 miles an hour, and I went to stop, and my car just like started to slide, like, I'm like, ah! Like stared right at him, and then I was like, remember the show? He's like, why? Like hit this side, and like it just went right around him, you know, like as soon as my body like unlocked, you know, from that position.
Yeah.
But it was such a weird like realization, you know, like in a matter of moments. Oh yeah, the wheels are locked. Oh, I'm gonna slide right into them. Unlock the wheels.
Yeah, and it's amazing how time slows down too to give you, you know.
Yeah, and
like-
it just happens in a fraction of a second.
Yeah, but that's, you know, it's good that you have that training, because it's, you know, most of the time you'd lock up and you just,
Yeah.
you don't know. So it's like,
And in the past, that's totally happened to me, and I didn't quite understand what was happening because your brakes actually function on the front wheels of your car,
Right.
and they're also the steering wheels of your car.
Yeah, it's amazing how hard, if people don't grow up in snow, it's a completely foreign element to them.
Mhm.
When we went to, when I was stationed in San Diego, we went to Big Bear to go skiing, and there was a long line of cars that were getting stuck in the parking lot, and so I helped the first car. I mean, it was literally like, you know, they just sat there and they're like, I'm like, all right, back up. Okay, now turn your wheels. No, you know, and just walked them through it and got them through. And I ended up spending like almost an hour there just directing people how to get out of this parking lot, because they couldn't understand why they were getting stuck and how to get out of it.
It's a foreign driving element.
Yeah.
You know? And around here, it doesn't happen often enough. And I don't know. There are some communities where it's even worse. You know, like I was living over in SeaTac, and I was going to school nights, and they decided to call school like in the middle of our class. It was like, oh yeah, everybody should go home, you know, like while you still can. And I hit I-5 out near the Tequila Mall and stuff, like going up this hill, and people were just parking their car on the side of the freeway in all lanes. Like they were just like parking.
oh wow.
And so like if you stop, then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Like, but as long as you keep going, you're all right.
Yeah.
I remember getting up to my off ramp, and people had like blocked the entire off ramp coming off the freeway, and so there was no way to exit to get to my house. Like, and I remember having to circle back, and people would literally just like abandon their car in the middle of the road, like, and so you were kind of dealing with that and trying to make it. So it's always an interesting experience, and I'm not great in the snow because it only snows here like a couple times a year.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am fantastic in the snow.
I actually
I've
didn't.
been driving it for 5 years.
I've matter of familiarity, right? Like,
Did you guys?
there are people who would have trouble driving in the rain, just like there are people who would have trouble
Yep.
driving over in Seattle or
Yeah,
driving.
Yeah.
Taught to drive in the snow by my mom, who learned to drive in the snow
In
in
the first
Alaska.
in the first 3 years we were in Edmonds,
Are you
we
guys
were
gonna
in
sit
3
here and pay
accidents
attention, or do you wanna
because
go
the
to
driving culture there was just like.
What's that?
There's people on
I've
the
been
road
reading
when it
this
snows
stuff
that have no
because
business,
we're
like,
reading
you know,
through
they're in a real wheel
commute.
drive, Mustang,
We can
D8
talk about
Mustang,
it.
Yeah.
and there's a sheet of ice and 2 inches of snow.
Are you gonna like?
Yeah, I
So
got
you should just stay home, man.
I got
Justin's teaching about all the emperors.
Could I
And
join you
then,
guys later, maybe?
I was turning left and the lady decided
I'm
she was
gonna
gonna go
do
around the
it
bus
there.
while I was turning
It
left
went
and
that
she
way, but-
went right in us, and that one was my fault.
Yeah, but there's.
But my insurance would be
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah.
But over here, not an issue.
Well, when we lived on Bainbridge, I mean, speaking of cultures, you know, it's
Yeah.
just, you get a little dusting on the road, you think, oh yeah, no big deal. But then it's like, then you see a car in the ditch, and it's, granted, there are a lot of hills on Bainbridge, but, you know, even still, it's like, huh.
One of our favorite cartoons is a cartoon called Bless the Hearts, and it's like a southern family, and they do this whole bit about how like you get a couple snowflakes and everybody starts freaking out, and they start like crashing, and they're like, you gotta go get milk and bread, milk and bread.
Yeah. And toilet paper, yeah. Yeah.
You said that was South Park?
That was from Bless the Hearts,
Oh.
which is a really funny kind of southern show, where like it's a southern-based family.
I like comfy.
I actually went to the same school as the South Park creators.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They got a lot of their ideas from our school, Mr. Mackey.
Yeah.
Our school counselor was Mr. Lackey.
Wow.
He talked to
Yeah.
I'm
That's awesome. I could see how a lot of that could be taken.
Yeah.
Real life.
come to my office after
Okay.
school, okay?
I'm in the Nikki
I actually didn't get in my first taxi until I was 22. Got in, I was stationed in Everett and I went home and paid for leave and was driving back and heading into,
And
I was in Idaho. and there was,
Nikki usually sits right here, yeah?
outside of Spencer, I can't remember, coming down the hill, approaching a bridge that crossed the Snake River and in Idaho and that, those areas, you know, you hit, it's not like here where, you know, rain just kinda drizzles or.
Right? Piper's
There's
got
like,
her kids.
it'll be sunny and then there's just a wall of rain, sheets of rain, yeah, and I hit that rain, hydroplane into the center barrier of the bridge. Totaled my trip.
It happens. Thankfully, I don't think I've been in any of it been truly like life-threatening.
Yeah.
Nice. A lot of close calls.
That one car accident, that where you got rear-ended, accident in Dean.
Oh yeah, she does go to the
That one
Where's my?
did her whiplash really bad though.
What? Where's your coffee?
It's right behind.
Think I'm ready? I'm just thinking about
Oh,
ready.
praise him.
I'm not ready.
For today?
For this level of energy is
Don't worry about it.
All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning!
Everybody have a good week.
Yeah, I did.
Is Paul and Megumi coming?
No.
They're in
Arizona right now.
Oh,
Until
Tuesday.
Tuesday,
Phoenix?
probably.
I don't know, wherever Paul's parents live.
Did they drive down or fly?
Why?
So Rager at Paul's house.
What's
Yeah.
that?
I said Rager
Yeah.
at Paul's house.
I don't care.
What time?
I thought I Let's open up in prayer this morning. Father God, thank you for today. Thank you for this body. I ask that you would help us to put those concerns and worries and distractions of the world aside and focus on you. I pray that the messages today would be edifying and anything that is false would be forgotten and corrected. And thank you for your love and for the love of this body. Amen. All right, quick recap. So, I think we left off, so Constantius, Constantine's last surviving son.
Justin, is your mic on?
Oh, no, sorry.
Thank you.
Is it working? Okay. So Constantius, Constance's last surviving son, who is an Arian sympathizer. He is dealing with Persia. He's busy dealing with Persia, and one of his cousins, Julian, who becomes emperor of the Western Empire, and is gaining support. So if you remember, Julian was essentially not agnostic, but he grew up raised by Eusebius, who was the bishop that baptized Constantine. So he was kind of, in a way, Bible thumped growing up and isolated. And so he witnessed kind of the corruption and dealings of the church and the government. And so he kind of got a bad taste in his mouth for Christianity. So he went down the route of following philosophers and so when he becomes of age, he travels around Rome and learns from different philosophers, and so he eventually is given the position of Emperor of the West after both Constance and Constantine II are killed. And so he starts out as a bookworm. He's looked down by his military generals, but he does the hard work and trains with the soldiers, and he's pretty effective in dealing with the Germans, and his strategies are sound. He's smart, so he starts gaining a good reputation among both the citizens and the military. Granted, there's a couple generals that kind of go against him. He asks for support during a siege, and as one of the generals ignores his request. But overall, he's gaining support, and he becomes kind of a threat to Constantius. And so, in an attempt to remove some of Julian's power, he demands that Julian send basically the best of his military out east to help with Persia. And Julian denies Constantius's request, and so they start, becoming at odds. And eventually, Constantius does some back end deals with the Alemanni and other German tribes to try to create more conflicts for Julian to deal with. And so Julian gets to the point where he's had enough, and so he is prepping to march west to deal with Constantius. And then Constantius gets kind of a break from Persia, and so he starts gearing up his military to march west. And so Rome is kind of heading towards a civil war, which, if it would have occurred, would have probably been one of the biggest civil wars in Rome's history, because each side had, a massive army. So, but
at the time that Constantius starts to march west, he becomes ill, and he refuses to stay put and deal with his illness, and so the next day he dies. So that leaves Julian as sole emperor of the empire. And so Julian quickly goes to work in basically reversing a lot of Constantine the First's Constantine the First's, political laws and regulations against the pagans, and he starts kind of clearing out the corruption of both the state and church involvement, and basically institutes the freedom of religion. So anybody was free to practice paganism or Christianity, but he also actively tried to devolve the unity of the Catholic Church. So he, in reinstating paganism, he had the temples that had initially been dedicated to the Roman gods, were overtaken by Catholic, the Christians, and so he had those returned as dedicated temples to the Roman gods, and then he basically reinstated those groups that were called heretics, or didn't really reinstate them, but gave them the opportunity to reestablish themselves. So he, in so doing, the Donatists, prior to this, the Donatists had primarily remained in the North African region. Some of them migrated up north to Syria, but the majority of them remained in North Africa. And they had met in homes because they were, at the time, North Africa was basically controlled by bishops who were staunch Nicene, Catholic sympathizers, and so the Donatists lost influence, and so they would meet in homes, and so with the proclamations of Julian, they were able to actually go back and take a lot of the churches that had been established. So they entered churches, they cleared out, a lot of the altars and the icons, which I wanted to cover really quick because Holly brought this up a couple weekends ago in Venerism. So if you can imagine first off, sometimes I hate Word. So after the Edict of Milan in 313, anybody remember what the Edict of Milan was?
It gave religious freedom to pursue. It basically gave the people of the Roman Empire freedom to pursue their religions.
Right. So it abolished state-led persecutions against the church or against Christians. So, and that immediately after this, for the first time in Roman history, they built grand dedicated churches. You had a couple popular churches in Jerusalem. You had one in Rome, Antioch, Nicomedia, Constantinople, and these are pretty grand structures. So, what are they going to fill these with? And you're talking about a culture that has been doing, I guess, practicing Venerism for centuries. They venerated their emperor, for centuries. So for that to carry over into Christianity isn't a far stretch. So, but even prior to the Edict of Milan, archaeologists have uncovered the catacombs that the churches would meet in, and there was art all over the cave walls. It wasn't uncommon for Christians to express their spirituality through art on walls. So but after the Edict of Milan, these the ritualistic arts and icons begin filling these grand churches. And then it just progressively grew over time, and especially in the eastern part of Rome, because a lot of the converts were either of you have Armenia, which was a very artistic culture, and then of course Persia. They were another very poetic and artistic culture. So that carried through in the converts that would come over to Christianity, and not Egypt as well. Egypt was also the same. So it wasn't something new, especially amongst Roman Christians, but it grew so much so that as we'll get into, by the 8th century, the king actually had to outlaw icons and art within the churches because he viewed them as idolatry. So it became outlawed until the Second Council of Nicaea, which we'll get into when we get to that time period. So the Donatists, they start gaining traction back in North Africa. They start kind of cleaning out the churches and taking back over church buildings there, gaining significant support. And also in Julian's efforts, he allowed all banished Christian bishops to return to the churches. So that wasn't really out of the goodness of his heart. His ultimate goal was to destabilize the Catholic Church. So he was trying to basically corrupt the unity that the Catholic Church was adamantly trying to achieve. In response, if you remember, the Catholic Church, as the Donatists are clearing out the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church started kind of pushing propaganda stating that, in the Donatist efforts, they were actually killing bishops in what they were doing. So, in an attempt to regain control of North Africa. This was ramped up by Aurelius, who was the bishop of Carthage, in order, his goal was to push out the Donatists completely out of North Africa. And then really quick, I wanted to spend a couple minutes looking at one of the primary ordinances of the churches at this time, and that was baptism. So we know from the writings of the apostolic fathers, such as Clement, who was a pastor in Rome during the later part of the 1st century, Ignatius, who was also a pastor in Antioch during the same time, and then Pastor Hermas, who was also a pastor in Rome during the 2nd century. So from their writings, it's clear that the churches were practicing full immersion, and it was a prerequisite for entering in the covenant of God. So, outside of Scripture, just reiterating or reaffirming the practice of a covenant relationship with God through full immersion. So there's also evidence that infant baptism took place as early as the mid to late 2nd century through the writings of Tertullian, who was from North Africa. So he wrote, in opposition. He wrote in opposition to infant baptism, although it wasn't widespread. It was a concern of the churches that it would gain traction.
Was this the very first time of infant baptism, or was that from another faith?
As far as we know, within the
Okay.
church, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it could have been going on, but as far from the writings that we've uncovered, that's really the first mention that we've got of infant baptism. So we also have evidence from the writings from the Council of Carthage in 253 that Cyprian, who was essentially a Christian lawyer and the Bishop of Carthage, took the stance that infants should be baptized as soon as they were born. And then there was a council in Elvira, which was in southern Spain, that took place to oppose this the proceedings of this council, with the goal of opposing the baptism of infants. And in fact, they went kind of the pendulum kind of swung the opposite direction, and they required someone to attend church for 2 years before getting baptized. So it was like a method to make sure, this is a serious commitment, and we want to make sure you're serious in your faith before you commit to being baptized. And then by the middle of the 4th century, more and more bishops and held councils supported the implement of infant baptism. So it was starting to grow. Then there was a fusion. Anybody know what a fusion is? Isn't that infusion? A fusion. It was the sprinkling of water. A-F-F-U-S-I-O-N. A fusion.
I heard fusion, F-U-S-I-O-N.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
I'm like, Korean and Japanese, like.
Yeah, so a fusion was the pouring or sprinkling of water on the head. And this took place primarily because, back then there were a lot of sick people. So fully submerging someone that's sick, or, some areas they didn't even have access to that kind of water to submerge. The only water they had was, drinking water or very critical water. So they wouldn't want to dunk people in their water. So they, it was a way to still meet the requirements of baptism without submerging someone. But this would grow even, outside of areas where, or outside of conditions where water wasn't readily available, or, people weren't sick, and started becoming a common practice around the 8th century, especially in France. And then back to infant baptism. By the 5th century, infant baptism, or what they call pedo baptism, became common practice among the Catholic Church. So this is relevant because I'm going to talk about the Council of Laodicea, where they too would decide that those who were to be baptized must first learn the creed by heart and recite it, and that they must remain a long time under spiritual instruction before they receive baptism. Well, because it was I mean, back then it was still widely accepted that baptism was a requirement to, you had to be in covenant with God to,
It was still to enter a covenant
Yeah.
relationship with the rationale for baptism.
right.
Because I've spoken to some folks that, like modern folks that attend Catholic Church, and the rationale is very different, has nothing to do with covenant. With a covenant, it has more to do with, it's a training or like the instructions to train up a child in the way they should go. So that's the first step
Right.
in the training of being a godly person, is to undergo baptism, and then you enter a period of learning
Mhm.
before you begin to begin to commune that relationship. And so I'm curious how that's
Yeah.
evolved.
No, I thought you were going to take that in the direction of it was more of a locative or condition, like if you're not baptized, then you potentially would go to purgatory, or if you died at a
Well, it's part
young
of it,
age,
right? It's the
right.
first step in your training of how to be close to
Right.
God. And so if you haven't embarked on the start of the journey, then you're not quite there yet. So that was,
Yeah,
I mean,
and we'll get into that
I
because
was told it was like the family was dedicating the child, so the baptism was kind of like the family dedicating the child to be raised up.
it's, yeah, I can't
Isn't
find
it?
a single common, I can't find like one single rationale. I shouldn't say I can't find. I haven't done enough research to say that for certain
Didn't you
yet.
marry a former Catholic?
What are your thoughts?
So I don't know what it was when it first developed, but I'm sure things have changed.
Mhm.
But the way that I see baptism is more just to recognize that, yeah, that you are going to be. It's basically a symbolic way of saying that I will be, closer to God.
The way that you see baptism, or the way that you see it from modern Catholic frame of mind?
Like the
So
infant
modern
baptism.
Catholics, I mean, there's 7 sacraments, and so baptism is the first start of your journey. Like you're saying, it's a ritual. It's basically saying that we are going to be a child of God, but you have to go through. You got to learn reconciliation, how to talk to God, and basically live with your sin. Find ways to be, seek forgiveness for your sin. And then the end point is confirmation, where you basically will say that, okay, I'm going to be part of this church.
Oh, okay.
So confirmation is the big, and that happens when you're, well, I don't know, but
In the
it's,
Lutheran church, it's in the 8th grade, and you can take communion.
but,
yeah,
oh yeah, communion's one, your first communion.
Marriage is one.
Marriage is a sacrament, yeah. But yeah, confirmation is really where you're part of the church, and that happens when you're a teenager.
yeah.
Typically.
From the couple of historians I'm reading, initially infant baptism was primarily to ensure the child's position within the covenant. Especially back then,
Infant
how many,
so
what was infant mortality?
awful.
Yeah.
Terrible.
So and that gets modified or influenced over time, through Gnosticism, Dante's Inferno is a product of, the thinking of the time, when we approach the turn, the, what is it, 13th, 14th century. Emmy, did you have a comment?
I do, and I think this is a pastor question, because I have heard that if a child dies, they immediately go to heaven, because they're innocent of the world and whatever. I don't know if that's biblical, but we're talking about, baptizing a child, like through Catholic, sprinkling. So is it biblical that if a child dies, they go to heaven? Like, I don't remember, seeing that. I know Jesus talks about a child being innocent. Treat this child, or something that along those lines. I can't super recall, but
I think I remember, I don't know if this was taught in my Catholic church or not, but I think I do recall it being presented that if a child was not baptized before they died, that they would be, you know, in that purgatory, you know, just
Limbo.
in a limbo. And so by baptizing them before they would potentially die, it would kind of give them an edge more towards, you know, towards heaven.
So
Towards
that's
God.
right. Do Catholics do baptism for the dead? Do they
No,
do that?
that's the
No?
Mormons.
No,
well,
I know Mormons
yeah.
do, but I know Celine, she's a Catholic, and she did baptisms for the dead.
Oh, I
And
haven't
she's
heard
from
of that.
France, so I don't know if it's a French Catholic thing or not.
I don't know.
I'll have to ask her. I'll ask her. Don't ignore just what I said.
But
But
that's
I'll
where
ask her.
those indulgence sales come in, where you can buy favor. That gets big in,
Century.
yeah, where if you're worried about the validity or this, you know, a deceased relative, you can pay money or perform certain acts in order to pay into their spiritual well-being.
That's silly.
Well, I mean, I mean that's an entirely different topic
Yeah.
that I won't steer down. But I'd say, in short, I think Scripture supports that a child would still enter into the kingdom.
okay. I was just wondering because again we were talking about baptizing
Yeah.
babies and
You
whatnot.
need to take a baby.
What time am
I'll
I
take
supposed to be
care of
done right now?
10:50ish.
Okay. Well, before I'll end it there, so we don't get halfway through the council in Laodicea.
Maybe I have some research to do on baptism. Principles.
Yeah. But yeah, so Julian is kind of revamping the empire. There's some disunity among the Catholic Church, which is part of the reason why, what leads to the Council of Laodicea. And then Julian will become obsessed with taking back territory from Persia, and he overexerts his military, and in one of the battles he ends up getting pierced with a spear and is killed by the Persians. And so we'll pick up next weekend with, we'll go through the Council of Laodicea, and then we'll look at the next next emperors in line after that. So, any comments or questions?
Thank you.
Yeah.
You could get outside.
All right.
I've learned so much from this.
Thank you.
Who's preaching today?
Justice.
Yeah, I have something, but I
I
hear
have a
Ryan might do it.
testimony
Yeah, Ryan
if I
sent
could
me a message.